Good evening and welcome to another one of our lovely book events. It's such a pleasure sitting here talking to so many wonderful authors, and particularly tonight we've got, well, two of my favourites. Firstly, this is a celebration for Christy Lefteri. We're publishing her new book, and wave them up, pair of you. I know you both got them.
Oh, you know?
Songbirds, there we go. And so that's why we're here fundamentally. And massive thanks to Clare Pooley, who we did an event with her previously. Authenticity Project, such a wonderful book. It was actually one of our books of the month previously, and got a unanimous set of love from everyone involved. So massive thanks to you both. Now, audience, your job is to send questions in. You'll see along the bottom a Q&A function. You know the form. You've done a few of these already. So I want to see lots of your questions coming in from around the halfway mark, but feel free to submit as soon as you think of anything. And I will return, and I will put those to Christy and indeed Clare, if any questions for Clare. I will also be putting a link to getting Authenticity Project from our bookshop as well. Anyway, without further ado, can I hand over to the wonderful Clare Pooley?
Thank you. And hi, Christy. It is such an honour to be chatting to you this evening. But before we talk about your incredible new novel, which launches today, hooray, I just wanted to embarrass you hugely by doing a bit of fangirling and talking about some of your incredible achievements and accolades. So please forgive me and try not to blush.
Okay, I'll try.
So the Beekeeper of Aleppo, your previous book, has now sold over 1 million copies around the world, which is extraordinary. It was one of Amazon's 10 top-selling books of 2020. It was in the Sunday Times bestseller list for pretty much the whole of 2020, as far as I can tell. It was a Rich and Jodi pick. It's sold in over 30 countries. It was a runner-up in the Dayton Literary Peace Prize of 2020 and the winner of the Aspen Words Literary Prize in 2020. It was also shortlisted for the British Book Awards in 2020. So, you know, absolutely amazing achievements. And your new book has also received some incredible reviews already. I'll just read out a couple which are just extraordinary. So Jodi Picoult, who I think everyone will know, says, "I've never read anything quite like Songbirds, a beautifully crafted novel that sits at the intersection of race and class." And then Heather Morris, the author of The Tattooist of Auschwitz, says, "Beautiful, Songbirds will break your heart and open your eyes." And I have to confess that I was really nervous about doing this event, because you know that feeling when you admire somebody's work so much and you think that their next novel couldn't possibly live up to your unbelievably high expectations. Well, that's how I felt about reading Songbirds. And I have to say, I was completely wrong, and Songbirds exceeded all my expectations. And I think personally that it's even better than The Beekeeper of Aleppo. So I am really honoured to be talking to you today, and thank you.
I am blushing, by the way. Thank you.
I thought you might.
That was really, really nice. Thanks.
Now, The Beekeeper of Aleppo was such a huge publishing sensation, and I wondered how it felt to start writing another novel after that. I mean, did you find that it gave you confidence, or did you find yourself completely paralyzed by the weight of expectations? I mean, how did it feel starting to write this book?
Kind of both. I think I was conflicted between those two feelings. So there was a part of me that was absolutely terrified and slightly paralyzed, but not, maybe paralyzed is the wrong word, because actually I did get up and do the research. And I think it's because when I became interested in writing the story, or when I became interested in what was going on in real life, the events that inspired Songbirds, I think I became so passionate about the subject matter that it kind of helped me to ignore the terrified feelings I had, if you see what I mean. But I think there was a lot of I put a lot of pressure on myself, and it's still there. I still feel a lot of anxiety when I think, oh God, Beekeeper did so well. What's going to happen with Songbirds? Because writing is so important to me. You know, I feel weird when I'm not writing. I don't feel as settled or as happy when I'm not writing. And, you know, ultimately what I would love to do is continue writing stories that I'm so passionate about, as I did with Beekeeper and as I've done with Songbirds. So I think that's where the fear comes from. Like, what if I write something and then people don't like it, and then people won't want me to write more, and then I won't be writing more, and then that means I won't be right. So that's the kind of thought process and the fear that happens. But then once I get passionate about something, then that sort of just drifts away and I forget about those feelings. They come back again later, like now when the book's coming out. but I think when I was in the process of writing, I just got so into writing that I just forgot how afraid I was, and I just kind of allowed the story to kind of take me with it in a way.
Yeah, so it's about focusing on the story and the people behind the story, rather than worrying about your audience, I guess.
Or worrying too much about I don't know how it will be receased, because the audience is always there, isn't it? I mean, I never forget that there's going to be an audience, but it's kind of not, getting into a state of mind where the audience doesn't become persecutory, and kind of just allowing yourself to kind of sink into the story.
Yeah, I understand. And I mean, tell us a bit, for those of us the people who haven't yet read Songbirds, can you tell us a bit about it and where the inspiration came from?
Sure. So, well, it came from kind of three separate things. One of those were, well, I'll talk about this first. So when I was touring for Beekeeper, I was often asked the question in kind of not so many words, but it was roughly, the question was, how do we get people to understand that refugees are not migrants, that they have to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a genuine question, but it kind of saddened me and it got me thinking. And so that was one thing that was on my mind, the fact that this question kept coming up. And then the other thing was that I have in Cyprus, most people have domestic workers. It's not like here. It's most middle-class families have domestic workers. So if you walk down the street and there's 50 houses, 49 of those houses will have a domestic worker that stays with them. And I would stay with a family member that had a domestic worker. Her name was Monarca, and she and I became really close. I was going through a divorce at the time. And so, I remember when I arrived, she kind of got up to make me breakfast and called me madam. And I was like, that's weird. Don't call me madam. And no, don't make me breakfast. I'll make it, that kind of thing. She was like, no, madam, this is my job. I have to do it. And so what I did is I woke up the following day earlier than her and made her breakfast. And then it kind of got her laughing, and we, and then we became friends. And then, I was kind of racing to make her breakfast so she wouldn't make me breakfast. So anyway, we just started talking, and she was like, listen, talking to me about my divorce. And then I asked her about her husband, and she told me that he died in a farming accident and he was the love of her life. And she had 2 daughters, and that they were really, really young when he died. And she had to make the really difficult decision of leaving Sri Lanka and going to Cyprus. And when I had met her, she hadn't seen her daughters for about 7 years. So she was having a full-blown relationship with them through a screen. And I met her daughters through the tablet, and I met her mother-in-law, and she told me about her town, and she told me why she'd made the sacrifice and why she had to leave. And not only did she tell me these things, but day after day I could see them, and I could see the effect that it was having on her. So for me, that was that friendship I had was huge. And then, so now she's left those employers and she works with another family that have children. And I think maybe my feeling is that perhaps she wanted to be around children. And I know that since then she has gone to see her daughters once. So that's once now in 9 years. Wow. And so anyway, so there's those two things. And then a friend of mine sent me an article, this was about 2.5 years ago now, maybe a bit longer, about domestic workers in Cyprus that had gone missing. So it was 5 domestic workers and 2 children. They'd gone missing and the police refused to search for them because they were foreign. And when I read the article that she sent me, I was really not surprised. And the fact that I wasn't surprised that the police didn't want to search for them made me angry. And it was that anger plus the questions that were asked about migrants, plus my friendship with Menaka, those things came together and inspired me to write this story. And I know that was a really long answer, but
no, that's am I right in thinking that you went to Sri Lanka as well? And
no,
you didn't. So your relationship with Sri Lanka was purely through that tablet and the sort
exactly. And
as in the novel.
I was actually planning to go, but then we went into lockdown, and Menaka had invited me. She said, if you go, you can go and stay with or you can go and see my mother-in-law and she'll show you around. So I was actually planning on going. I really was going to go. And then we went into lockdown and I couldn't go. And then I thought to myself, but you know, the thing is, this is the story is told through the perspective of Petra and Yiannis, who both haven't been to Sri Lanka. So in a way, I had to kind of imagine what they were imagining Nisha's life was like. So it wasn't kind of too removed. Me writing Nisha's story and trying to imagine where she was from, it was a little bit like Petra trying to imagine and Yiannis trying to imagine.
And that's actually something I really wanted to talk to you about is the choice of narrator, because effectively this is a story about the plight of domestic workers, and yet the story isn't told through the voice of Nisha, the key domestic worker in the novel. It's told by two different narrators.
Yeah.
And why did you choose not to tell the story from the perspective of Nisha?
So that was really intentional. It didn't happen by accident. I didn't want to speak for Nisha or any other domestic worker. And yes, it's a story about the plight of migrant domestic workers in this case. However, it's also a story about how people can live in sort of ignorance, hence Petra and Yiannis in his own way, you know, with the poaching and sort of live in ignorance and get stuck in a sort of bubble of a certain way of seeing things or a certain way of approaching life or understanding other people. And it's kind of a story about what it means to break out of that bubble and see things for what they really are and see people for who they really are. And so I wanted the reader to be able to piece the character of Nisha together and then just hear her voice right at the end so that it kind of carries itself. This is what I was hoping for, that it would carry itself sort of into the silence of the ending, if that makes sense, like that somehow her voice would. But the thing is, I think I just, when I went, because I did manage to go to Cyprus to research a lot before the lockdown, and when I was learning about the women who had disappeared, I was hearing their stories through other people, and in a way, I had to piece together what I imagined these women had felt or experienced or whatever. So I kind of, in a way, I made the novel. It was written from the perspective of me rather than the perspective of characters who had to learn, because I learned so much when I was interviewing people and understanding the sacrifices that women had made, and even hearing Menaka's story, I learned so much. So I guess, you know, the characters in the story and perhaps also the reader might learn the things that I learned while I was researching.
Well, that's certainly the way that I felt. I felt that, you know, I learned about the plight of the workers as you know, your characters did. So as Petra and Yiannis, you know, sort of find out more about what's going on, I also started questioning all my assumptions and all my beliefs. So you know, personally, I think it works absolutely beautifully and exactly the way you intended. You know, I'm fascinated by the way that, you know, all your writing is you know, focuses on these really important stories, and you're just such an amazing storyteller. And I wondered whether about your childhood and whether your parents were also storytellers, because they were refugees from Cyprus who came over to London, and you were born in North London, I believe. And did they tell you stories of what, you know, how their journey was and what it felt like for them at that point in time?
Well, I really love that question, and it's a question that makes me feel nostalgic as well. I think the biggest storyteller in my family was my grandfather. So I think I must have spent hours upon hours upon hours upon hours upon hours sitting on his lap listening to stories. And the one I remember the most was about these two brothers that stole a door. I don't know. Do you know what? I cannot remember how the story ends, but they stole a door and then they needed to use it as like protection, and they were fighting over it. And I kept wanting him to repeat that story, but there were hundreds of stories and I would never get bored. And then I'd want a repeat of those stories. And they were set everywhere, and there were fairy tales and legends, and some of them were real stories. And so, like, for example, he had like a broken, what was it, like one of his eyes was kind of clouded over, and I always wanted to know the story of how that happened. And it was while he was in an off license in Brixton, and someone chased him with a baseball bat or something, but then they became friends. So even the real life stories were, the way he told them were really interesting. So I think definitely my granddad. But then the other important thing was that my mum, whenever we went to bed, she would read us a bedtime story. And I absolutely loved that you know, that time where we would just lie back and listen to bedtime stories. And then after, even when I was old enough to read, sometimes I'd still want the bedtime story from her. Interestingly, my dad didn't really tell stories much, actually, probably not at all. He's not really a storyteller, but I have spoken about this before, like especially when I wrote Beekeeper and I was talking about transgenerational trauma. Like, for example, my dad was an officer during the war in Cyprus in 1974. So the fact that he never spoke about that war because he was trying to protect me and my brother, the silence of those untold stories were really, really always around, like really always around. It was, you know, if I look back at my childhood, it's something that was always there. And that sense of displacement, that sense of loss, naturally that happens when, you know, people move from one country to another and they've lost so much. So I guess those things were part of the fabric of my childhood, the saddest stories, the silent ones, the kind of riveting, colourful ones that my grandfather told, and then those lovely books that my mum used to read us. So I guess all of those kind of fed into my imagination, even the silent ones.
Oh, that's fabulous. And I think your father might be listening to this now. Is that right? From Cyprus?
Do you know what? I don't know if he's managed to, I actually don't know if he's managed to download Zoom.
Well, if he has, then
this has been recorded, so he was asking me if it was going to be recorded just in case he didn't manage to download it. So either way, hi.
And there's something else that sort of runs through your novels is the natural world. So, you know, there are obviously the bees in the Beekeeper of Aleppo, and in Songbird, you know, there's one of the narrators is a poacher. He poaches songbirds, and your descriptions of death, the capture and death of these songbirds is absolutely harrowing. And obviously it's a fabulous metaphor for the plight of the migrant worker, because, you know, they flee their homelands looking for freedom, and they end up trapped, just like the songbirds. And I wondered about your own sort of relationship with the natural world and how that inspires you, because it doesn't read like North London upbringing, you know. So where does that come from?
Again, I think probably the stories that we were just talking about, like a lot of the stories that I heard, and not just from my grandfather, from my grandmother, from other people in my family, from the fact that I visited Cyprus every single year of my life from when I was born. So, and also just, I don't know if many children are like this, but I just remember when I was young, just really, really noticing what was going on with the seasons. Like, it was so important to me. I don't know, I just remember that. I have that feeling that, like, any little changes I saw with the trees, or the buds on the trees, or the grass, or the colors, or whatever, I would just sort of notice it, and it would become such a big deal in my head. It was just something that was really, 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 really a huge part of my childhood. Even like when the daisies came up, and we would make daisy chains, and I don't know, the little buttercup flowers, and we'd like put them under our chin.
Yes, I remember doing that.
Like butter, and just, you know, waiting for those flowers to pop up when, you know, when spring started, and then the daffodils, and then the blossoms, and then how it all kind of, I would just constantly watch the seasons year after year and be really excited about the change of each season, whichever one it was. I loved each one separately. And I just remember that feeling like it was a really real love that I had for nature and animals. And I think it's part of my family that we all love animals so much. Like, my mum would feed all the pigeons, and, you know, we had like, I remember when me and my brother were young, we had like, there were two birds that visited our garden. It was a robin and a blackbird, and we named them Batman and Robin. And and then the cat ate them. Well, Jojo ate Robin, and then no, Jojo ate Batman, and then Robin would jump around the garden looking for Batman.
There's a bird in here called Batman, isn't there?
Yeah, see? Yeah. So you see, this is where it comes from. That, like, and my mum would just like always feed the birds, and she loved all the animals, and I remember, like, always she would say that she felt sorry for animals more than humans, because animals couldn't tell us their pain. But I think they can tell us in their own way, in some way. But I think I don't know, I have this love for nature, and this love for animals, and like, it's just something that's really, really, really embedded in my heart.
Well, it certainly comes through in here, because, as I said, the descriptions of those songbirds as sort of, you know, had me completely sort of breathless, really.
You know, when I was doing the research, and I interviewed people that had actually been poachers in real life, and they told me about how they were killing the songbirds. I just remember really feeling horrible at the thought of it. So I guess I tried to portray that, because I didn't want to hide.
They kill them by biting their necks. Is that that's real, is it?
Yeah, but yeah, it's all real. Everything that I put in the book is real. So the fact, I mean, in terms of the songbirds, so the fact that they fly down and get stuck on these glue sticks, and the more they try and escape, the more stuck they get. So you see them, like, their wing, their little feet, and then they can't. They're stuck there.
Oh no, it's so tragic, and it is such a fabulous metaphor. So you know, and a great title. So yeah, no, it's obviously the whole story is set in Cyprus, but I was just interested in, because I read in your notes in the back of the book, you talk about having gone to visit now what they call the Justice for Domestic Workers organisation in London, and I wondered what your feelings were about how different things are in London from in Cyprus. You know, are the issues the same, or do you think they're very different?
I think they're quite different, because the stories that I heard, so normally the people that hire domestic workers here in the UK are kind of richer families, and sometimes the maids are brought here from abroad, and sometimes their passports are taken and they kind of get stuck in these homes with people and they don't know what to do, and sometimes they're abused and they escape. So these were the stories I heard about women that had come to the UK and they'd escaped, and Melissa Begonia, who's the head of the organisation, would go, I can't remember which park she would go to in London, and she would sit there and it was a park where I think it might have been Hyde Park or somewhere, and she'd sit there and look for domestic workers and hand them a card that said, if you need, you know, and the little card says, if you need help, contact us. So she'd help them escape. In Cyprus, it's different, because it's you know, I interviewed a lot of women there, and they're completely part of the fabric of society. In fact, I think if they weren't there, I don't know how families would function, because people have got so used to. I think my feeling is that since women have kind of, in a way, because Cyprus was quite traditional for a very, very long time, and I think more recently women have, you know, found their freedom and gone out into the workplace, and I don't mean recently as in the last 5 years, I mean in the last 40 years, for example, 50 years. And I think what's happened is the domestic workers have come in and taken their place in the house. And so that everything is expected from them, absolutely everything. So they're not kind of like, you know, we might kind of hire a cleaner and know that they're going to come in for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, and, you know, and the boundaries are all there and we know how much we're paying. You know, these women are like constantly working, and they are part of the family life and and sometimes that can be lovely. So you see like women that have found really good families, and they're really respected and appreciated, but other times there isn't. And a lot of the times they're kind of looked down on. And I remember, this is way before I started writing Songbirds, I was so annoyed at some of the things that I saw that I wanted to look at the contracts. So I had a look at the Cypriot contracts for domestic workers, and the word obeyed came up about 5 times. So domestic workers must obey their employer, blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm not, the last time I had a look was about 3 years ago, so it might have changed since then, I doubt it. But the word obey was definitely used more than 4 times.
And there's something so tragic, and you see it, you know, all through the book, about these women who leave their own children behind and then spend their lives mothering somebody else's children.
Yeah.
And, you know, for Nisha in the book, you know, the tragedy of only seeing her own daughter via an iPad, and yet she spends, you know, every hour bringing up another woman's child is really heart-wrenching.
So that's where you're saying about the differences and similarities. That is one thing that all the women had in common, that had left their children. So I remember when I listened to some of the stories of the women in the UK, do you know that there's that bit in the story where Nisha thinks that she hears her daughter crying?
Yes.
It was one of the women that had said that when she came to the UK, she kept thinking that she heard her baby girl crying in the night. So she kept waking up, but it was just her imagination. So I remembered that. I mean, it really gave me goosebumps, and I couldn't imagine what that might feel like. I couldn't even imagine it. And at the time, so then when I was writing that bit with Nisha, I remembered that lady and her story, and I thought, well, maybe I can incorporate this and into the story. And so I did in the way that Nisha really imagines that the crying is coming from like the earth and the trees and the sky and whatever.
Yeah, it's as if it's traveled across the globe, and she can hear it. There's a line, I can't find it now, but there's an incredible line in the book about how in order to give the women in Cyprus their freedom, they take the freedom away from somebody else. And I can't remember how you phrased it, but it really sort of hit home to me, is that idea of sort of, on the one hand, Petra, the mother, gains her freedom, and is able to work while bringing up her daughter by taking the freedom away from Nisha, her maid, and I feel there's a sort of really tragic circularity to it.
And and the thing is that you'd assume that it's easier for women to go out to work because there's more equality, but actually when you look at it, actually there isn't, because what's happened is other women have come in to take the place of the women so it's actually almost like a forced kind of, I don't know, a forced development, what looks like a development in society, but actually isn't.
It's only a development for some,
exactly.
Development for others, exactly. Sort of, it's and I hadn't really thought about it like that before. It's it really is a book that makes you re-look at your life and the roles of people around you. I was wondering, what do you really hope people take out from reading this book? I mean, would you like people to think differently about the world?
I guess that this idea of kind of seeing every single human being and respecting every single human being and seeing them in the way that we see ourselves, but also animals and little creatures and everything, like having, I don't know, it's that idea of compassion and care and being able to put our shoes in the feet of other people and imagining, what if we were them? Because that's exactly and precisely what Petra completely refuses to do, while she's so ignorant in a way that she doesn't even acknowledge Nisha. So when she loses her, she's forced in a way to put herself in Nisha's shoes and understand the sacrifices that she made, and understand what kind of a woman she was and what kind of a beautiful and strong woman she was, and not just to kind of see her in this two-dimensional way. So I guess for all of us, everyone, including me, to kind of just remember that during our everyday lives, whether it's to do with refugees or animals, there's so many things, like, the thing about the songbirds somehow in my mind also connects to, like these battery farms and, so.
I was going to ask you about battery farms, actually, because the poaching of songbirds is illegal in Cyprus, and through the story, there's always, Yiannis, the second narrator, is always completely aware that what he's doing is illegal and he could be caught and there would be terrible punishments. And I wondered why it is that we think capturing songbirds to eat is so terrible, and yet raising battery chickens who have an awful life and never get to fly at all is acceptable. And that seems to me to be, I mean, is it just because they're beautiful? And it's,
but is it acceptable? I think we've just got I think the thing is that we've become immune. I'm honestly convinced that that's what it is. And I've made the distinction in the story where Yiannis tells the story about his grandfather who used to capture songbirds. But the difference with his grandfather and the men of that time is they'd go out, and this is actually true, they'd go out into the mountains or into the forests, and they were, and a lot of people in Cyprus in those days, they were farmers, or they were you know, so they weren't kind of rich and they didn't have lots of meat to feed their families and whatever. So they'd go out and catch about 10 songbirds. So only what they needed. And so, you know, this isn't like, oh, we should all be vegetarian and not eat meat and whatever. It's more those animals, or are we just kind of like, is this sort of excessive greed?
So it's like the difference between fishing with a line and fishing with drag nets, effectively.
Exactly. That's it, exactly. Yeah.
Good. Hello. I'll jump in here. Claire, don't go anywhere, and please do chip in a few more of your own questions as we go. So audience, thank you for all the questions. They're coming in. They're coming in, well, initially in drabs, but now they're thick and fast, actually. So Jilly Boswell asked the first one: which was the most challenging to write, Beekeeper of Aleppo or Songbirds, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I think they were both challenging in their own way. So Beekeeper of Aleppo was challenging because I honestly kept crying through it. Because I'd worked at the refugee centre and I kept remembering the children, and I kept wondering, like, where are those children now? What about the children that didn't make it to the refugee centre? So I think I spent quite a lot of the time while I was writing Beekeeper crying, and also feeling really guilty that I'd come to the UK. So it wasn't so much writing it that was more challenging. It was that I kept somehow something in my mind had changed about life, and I feel like I'd lost like a naivety that I needed. I think is, in a way, it's, you know, kind of, it was just too real for me, you know, that the fact that I kept thinking about the children that hadn't made it to Greece, and where were they, and why did they have to lose their lives, and we've only got this one life, and, you know, and those thoughts were going round and round in my head. So that was the challenging thing about writing Beekeeper. And also the fact that it, you know, there was a lot of, then once I started to write it, there was so much more research that I needed to do about asylum interviews, and I was learning Arabic in order to kind of understand more about the culture, and, you know, so there was all this stuff. Now with Songbirds, what was challenging is that I think my friendship with Manaka meant so much to me that whenever I had a thought or a feeling about the women and what had happened to them, sometimes it was so, the sadness and the anger was so overwhelming that it would kind of, I can't explain the feeling, but it was almost too real. And this is what happens. This is what ends up challenging me when I'm writing. I get too emotional. So again, it was like that feeling of getting too emotional about it, and then needing to kind of process those emotions in order to make a story, rather than to have like these raw emotions just go onto the page. So I found that challenging. And also the fact that I could only really, I managed to go to Cyprus and do some research in the UK, luckily before lockdown, but then the rest of the story I had to write during lockdown, and therefore any other interviews that I needed to do after, I had to do on Zoom. So I found that challenging.
Gosh, I mean, I can entirely see why you're being so brilliant at writing, because you, just in the way you talk, you're the embodiment of enthusiasm and passion, aren't you? It's incredible. You're an inspiration to watch just during this event. I hope everyone else is enjoying.
Oh, thank you.
Karen, in fact, let's deal with your father thing, because is your father Stelios? No.
That's my boyfriend.
Okay, so he's watching. What's your dad's first name?
George.
George.
Is he there? I can't see the audience.
There's no George. But it is being recorded, so don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Karen Kenneby has submitted a few questions, actually. Let's deal with one of those. A lovely question. Do you write for yourself, or do you write for your audience, Christy?
We kind of touched upon this earlier, didn't we, Claire? Like this idea of always having the audience in mind. I always have the audience in mind. I don't know who they are, and it's sort of like an audience that's more like an abstract audience, a kind of feeling audience. So the audience is always there for me. I'm never writing for myself. I'm always writing to somebody, but that person is blurred, or those people are blurred. I don't know who they are, but it feels like when I write, I feel like it's a conversation and I think this is why writing is so important to me, because if it's weird, because I guess if my book didn't get published and people didn't read it, then I'd feel like that conversation kind of would go out, but then get trapped in a way. So it's like the writing is almost like a conversation that I start with people that are like there in essence, and that the whole process of writing, getting a book published, is about that kind of, it's almost like I don't know, it's weird, it's hard for me to explain it, but it almost feels like a sound that's going outwards. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I can think about it. So the audience is always there, but in a really abstract, kind of dreamlike way that's hard for me to explain.
Yeah. Claire, is that the same with you? Are you writing for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I find if I worry too much about the story people want to be told, I find I get sort of slightly paralyzed by fear, and instead I have to focus on the story that I really want to tell. And I feel like that's the same for you, Christy, is that you have to have a story that you can't help telling.
Absolutely.
And then you get over the fear. So I mean, so the audience, like you, the audience is always there, but I find that I can't worry about what they think too much. I just have to worry about trying to tell them the story.
Yeah.
Karen's responded by saying that it's so interesting. Liz Gilbert, for example, says she writes for herself and the audience is supplementary. So there was a lovely question from Margaret Stead. Hi, Christy. Congratulations on an utterly beautiful novel. Cyprus is almost a character in itself in Songbirds. It's so beautifully evoked. Was that perhaps made richer because you couldn't travel there while you were writing the novel? You touched on that a little earlier, but is that the case?
I don't know if it was made richer because I couldn't be there. I think it was made richer because I have been there so many times and I've seen all sides of Cyprus. You know, the side that's in the brochure, which is the lovely beaches, and also the other sides of Cyprus that's kind of, you know, where the Green Line exists and where there's division and where, you know, just the everyday kind of life of Cyprus. And so I guess it's to do with the amount of times I've been there rather than the fact that I couldn't be there. I think that's more the case.
Tess Alps, says she's a good friend of ours, lives nearby. Your writing powerfully conveys what it is to be a refugee, and readers can't help but feel empathy for their predicament. Have you thought of sending copies to our government, or does it maybe make you want to enter politics in order to bring that empathy and insight more directly into public policy?
I've thought about whacking them over the head with the book. Is that all right? And I do like Boris. Okay, that's probably a bit too violent, but okay.
Hit him with a hardback, I tell you.
I take that back. I mean, I don't know. I mean, would they read it, and would they, you know, I think, let's say they did read Beekeeper, for example, or in fact, if they did read other people's real life stories, how much would they absorb? How much would they take in? Or how much are they kind of caught up in kind of what they think they need to be doing for whatever reason? So I think that's a really, really good question, but I have very little hope that, number one, that they would take their time to listen to these stories, and number two, that they could actually be changed by the stories that they hear.
I suppose the other part of the question is whether you would change yourself to become a politician or move into that arena.
What, in order to get closer to Boris? So I can...
I feel that the job that you're doing, telling these stories yourself, I hope is making a difference out there in the world, because, you know, it's so easy to look at, you know, to see people as news stories or numbers or issues and not see the real people and the real stories behind that. And you know, and I don't think you need to be a politician. I think you should carry on doing the job that you're doing. And you are reaching millions of people doing that. So let's see if it makes a difference.
Sorry, I was interrupting you because I was so passionately trying to say I would definitely not be good as a politician. I'd be terrible. I know that 100%. My brother would be good, not me. I would definitely. But I mean, what you're saying about, you know, people become numbers, especially in the media. There's all this sort of crisis imagery, especially when it comes to refugees and the reporting about Syria and, you know, lots of other things. But there's lots of kind of non-specific language and crisis imagery, and we don't really, you know, I remember before I went to volunteer in Athens, I was watching the news, but I could easily switch it off and switch off. So it was only after I went there and really heard people's stories. And, you know, when I was saying earlier that, you know, one of the challenges of writing Beekeeper was that I couldn't switch off my emotions, and I was really overwhelmed by what I'd heard and what I'd seen, is because I met those people and heard their stories. So all this kind of like, all these numbers and figures and statistics and news flashes, I think just kind of, it's so easy to switch off from that. So I think, you know, I think that's the importance of storytelling, whether it's memoirs or fiction, that somehow, you know, both memoirs and fiction have their strengths and their weaknesses. And, you know, I think it's a matter of reading and listening as much as we can.
You know, so something you talked about right at the beginning is you know, how therapeutic you find writing, and how, you know, you can't imagine living without it. And it's, you know, it's obviously the way that you've used to process all your, you know, your emotions and your you know, your anger and your despair and all of those things. And, you know, I'm fascinated by the fact that in Beekeeper, Afra, the, you know, the one of the key characters is an artist, and she's blind. And, you know, I just thought it was so tragic that somebody who, you know, obviously lived through art became blind. And that just made me wonder how you would feel if you could no longer write, and whether you'd made that parallel, made that connection yourself to sort of the story of Afra.
I think I didn't while I was writing, but I have thought about it. Like, what if for some reason I stopped being able to write, which is a fear that I always have. And then there was a time where I had, it's called the Cuevas Syndrome, in both of my hands. This was, I had to have injections in my hands, and now they're okay and I can move them again, but I literally could not move my hands, and I couldn't type and I couldn't do anything. And when I was in that situation, it made me think of Afra, because I thought, and because I could not type, like I literally could not do anything. I had both of my hands in splints, and I remember wishing that I'd broken both of my hands, because at least there would have been an end point, but I didn't know when and how, and I was like that for 3 months. And I remember my agent saying to me, Christy, why don't you get that program where you can speak and it will write for you as you speak? And I was like, no, I can't do that, because that's not writing. I don't know what that is, but it's not writing. I need to use my hands. And it dawned on me how much I need my hands. Like, obviously, we all need that. Like, I need my hands for everything. But I was like,
how long ago was this?
This was like a month ago.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it was really, oh my God, it was so painful. I couldn't do anything. I could literally not even pull up my trousers.
I'm really glad you finished the book first.
I know. And the doctors were great. And look, I have my hands back. So
well, we can tell. Absolutely. So I assume that means you're writing another book at the moment.
Well, I've started thinking about it.
So do you know whose story you're going to tell next? Do you have a story that's desperate to be told yet?
Well, I've become really interested in the fires that have been happening around the world, and particularly, obviously, because of my connection with Greece, I wanted to go and research the fire that happened in Greece a few years ago, because I was actually there when the fire happened, and I remember I was constantly looking out the window to see if it was coming towards us. And you know, I just I fingers crossed want to go to the village of Madi and talk to people about, you know, because there were all these kind of reasons why the fire was worse than what it should have been. One was that the earth was not saturated at all with water because it had been so dry because of climate change. The other was because there was a beautiful river running through the town which had been blocked up, filled with concrete to make a road. And the other was that the people had built houses along the seafront, even though they weren't allowed to, so that when people tried to get to the water, they couldn't, they were stuck. So all these things. So what I want to explore is, people of the village and what they lost from that fire, but also the kind of wider issue of climate change. And I don't quite know where it's going to go and what I'm going to do with it, but my focus will be to go, first of all, to speak to people in the town and find out, what it was like for them. And then I'll take it from there. I don't quite know where it's going to go from there, but that's where I am at the moment.
That's, the fascinating process of walking into a village saying, right, tell me your stories, guys.
I know. And you can so do that in Greece, by the way, or Cyprus. You can do that. It's fine. People are just kind of all right with it.
When you start your stories, do you know where they're going to end up? Or do you allow your characters to show you the way?
Yeah, I totally don't know where they're going to end up. I just say, I'm really interested in this. I'm really passionate about this. I'm just going to start speaking to people. I'm just going to start reading, learning, and then slowly a character will develop, and then more, and then I'll start reading other things and learning other things, and slowly that will all come together, and eventually a story comes out of it, hopefully.
So when you start on chapter 1, you don't know what the ending is yet.
No. No, not at all.
Let's just clear up a few comments and questions. Some are just comments, actually. I love the idea of going with the flow, and keep writing. Don't go into politics. That's a throwback. That's from Karen, and she also said, really loving this conversation. Thank you so much. Priya, congratulations, Christy. As Ben said, I found your enthusiasm so refreshing. Please continue with your passionate writing. You are inspirational. And a comment from earlier, we are very subjective. We eat cows, but we won't eat horses. We eat rabbit, but we won't eat rat. So I'm just going through a few more. I had no idea that migrant workers disappeared in Europe. I've known about it in the Middle East. It's truly shocking. We are so naive. Thank you for bringing these situations to light. So poignant. How can we help to improve this? Gosh, that's a big question.
I know, and the thing is, I was often asked that when I did talk to a beekeeper, and it's such a difficult question to answer. And I guess my answer, all right, so when I was asked that question for beekeeper, my answer was always, sometimes there isn't much we can do apart from changing the way, or being constantly aware ourselves and changing our perspective. Because sometimes there isn't actually more we can physically do apart from, I don't know, going to protests and, I don't know, being an activist in some way, or volunteering, or doing something, or I don't know. I mean, apart from those practical things, I think the power of the individual mind, and then the collective minds, and the more people that kind of change their perspectives and open their minds and see things differently, perhaps that can slowly lead to change, as other changes in society have happened. I think that's probably where change in some way always begins, with people kind of changing their perspective. So I think just all of us just constantly being aware and not forgetting.
Brilliant. So Claire, I'll come back to you in a second just to give a last sort of summary of your thoughts about the book. But Christy, would you like to do some thank yous to anyone connected to you and this book?
Oh my God, where do I begin? So this is going to take a while. Well, no, I'll keep it short. Obviously, my editors, because writing this book was different to writing Beekeeper, in that I had their support all the way through, so I could send them drafts of the story, And I love that feeling of being able to have that kind of bouncing ideas and saying, oh, you know, I want to do this, what do you think? And then somebody saying something and then suddenly triggering something else. So I had that amazing support from my editors and my publishers in the UK and in the US. So really thank you to them, and to my agent, and to all the readers that read Beekeeper and gave me the confidence to write again. Because although, you know, we spoke about it at the beginning, although it's frightening, especially when a book does so well, to then write another one, there is also something quite freeing in knowing that people, that you've had so much support, and actually thinking, well, you know, but also to my family and friends that, you know, have been there, supported me, and all of that. So, and all the women that I spoke to and were willing to share their stories with me, the domestic workers and the poachers, and everybody that helped me to piece this story together. So that's thank you to everybody that was there for me.
Fantastic, fantastic. So we're down to the last couple of minutes. Claire, do you want to give your last kind of thoughts on what a wonderful book this is?
Oh, yes, I would just want to say thank you. And you know, I personally, I think that telling stories can change the world, and stories like the stories you tell really can change the world. They change the way people look at other people, the way we look at the world around us, the way we look at the natural world. And so I really just wanted to say thank you for doing that, and for breaking my book and making me think about things differently. It was a real gift, and please keep telling your stories.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been so lovely talking to you guys. I've really enjoyed it. You've been great to chat to.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Last couple of quick comments. Jill, thank you so much for an interesting and thought-provoking conversation. And Tess came back. One way of getting your moving narratives to a wider public is for it to be made into a film or TV series. Is there any movement on that?
Fingers crossed. I hope that can happen, but that's stuff that my agent deals with, so I'm not really, but all I know is that I have my fingers crossed, and hopefully.
Brilliant. Listen, thank you so much. Audience, I've put a link there on the chat to Claire's wonderful book. I'm sure many of you have already read it, Authenticity Project, which equally is it's a hard book to follow, I suspect, when you're such a brilliant book as well. We've got a few events coming up. Probably let me have a look. Leslie Cara, Shari Lapine is joining us, Holly Watt, Imran Mahmood, and William Shaw. And our next physical event is John Boyne. We're hosting the launch of John Boyne's Echo Chamber. So that will be a physical event. Can you imagine? In fact, I've just been. I asked Claire before we started whether she would do the interview. So I'm hoping you're going to say yes, but we'll deal with that afterwards. But Christy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for allowing a little bookshop like ours to host the launch.
Oh, it's been wonderful. It's really been lovely. Thank you for hosting my launch.
And thank you, Claire, for hosting, being the interviewer.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and I've enjoyed it immensely. So group hug.
Group hug. Audience, thanks for all joining us, and please keep an eye on tringbookfestival.co.uk for all our other events. There's always loads of them, and our main festival, which is in November. But thank you very much, and see you all very soon.